to go.
Welcome, Jason, to the Biohacker Babes.
So good to be here.
Yes. Okay. Just heard you at Dragonfly do your TEDx 10-minute talk. Very concise, very powerful and effective. And you are our first moldy on the show. First time talking about mold. Very excited to bring this to our audience.
Awesome.
I think mold exposure, mold illness, the idea of mold is gaining more and more attention. And we're very quickly demonizing mold. Like mold is bad. So I would love to kick off with, what is mold? What is its purpose? Because I don't think it's all bad. It's not inherently bad. What is mold here to do or to tell us?
Well, I think that's a great place to start. And by the way, it was great seeing you ladies at Dragonfly.
Yeah.
You did such a great job emceeing. It was a real pleasure. And it was
Thank
great
you.
to spend
Thank
some
you.
quality time. I'm glad we did that actually before this show. I feel like that was really it was fortuitous. So
Yeah.
It
but
worked
it's a
out.
pleasure.
Time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a pleasure to be here. So I've been looking forward to this. So mold is a 4-letter word for a lot of people. But it doesn't need to be that way. You know, mold is nature's digestive organism. Its job is to turn dead plant matter into dirt, right? So if we didn't have that, it would be a mess here. In fact, there was a time when we didn't have mold and fungi, and it's called the Carboniferous period, where trees would fall down and they didn't rot. They didn't decay, and that's why we have oil and all that good stuff, oil and coal. And so it was necessary to not have it, but now we really need it, because otherwise we just have piles of dead plant material everywhere. So it's doing its job if it's digesting these things in your yard, but not so much when it's doing that in your living room, right? And so when you look at our planet, I actually often think of, in fact, one of my screensavers is an AI generated image of planet fungi, which I wish I could share with listeners, but I'll send it to you separately.
Yeah.
And that's how I think about the planet, really. You know, this is planet fungi. We're on a water planet, you know, and mold operates in a very important area. And you know, people vilify mold because of course it causes a lot of illness, but you know, it's also been super helpful. I mean, it's where we get a lot of antibiotics. It's where we get a lot of delicious flavors like soy sauce, and of course beer and wine and cheese, and you know, the list goes on and on. And so to just sort of pigeonhole it into this dangerous thing is to miss the fact that it's really about how we interact with it that matters more so than it itself, right? It's like there's no good or bad, that only thinking makes it so, right? And so those labels and those judgments are I think ill-informed. So anyway, when we think about mold in general, there's also this hyper focus on mycotoxins, which and so for everyone who's sort of new to this subject, mold produces 3 things when it grows: spores, which are like the hardy reproductive capsules, kind of like seeds. Their job is to go forth and multiply, right? Go forth and prosper. And so they also carry little bits of toxins on them that are called mycotoxins, but these are only specific molds. Out of the 100,000 or so molds that are known, only about 100 species produce these toxins. So it's a very small amount. It's a rounding error, really. So there's a disproportionate focus on them as if it's the total source of illness. And the data on this is very strongly in opposition to that mycotoxins are responsible for a lot of illness, but not most of it. And so those toxins are what gets vilified. But if you go into a moldy building or a building where there's mold-related illness, those molds are not necessarily always present there. So that tells you something, right? There must be something else going on. Now, the spores can cause allergies, and the mycotoxins can cause all sorts of organ disruptions and metabolic disruptions and stuff like that if you get a lot of them. But the secret of this is that you're actually getting a lot of that from food, which we can unpack later. There's a lot of mold in our food supply, mycotoxin in our food supply. So the third thing that molds produce, so we got spores, we got the mycotoxins, which are these chemicals that are used to inhibit the growth of other organisms. It's a competitive tool. It's like chemical warfare on a microscopic level, okay, with these guys. But the third piece, and this is the most interesting piece to me, is the musty smell. The musty smell is often the first clue. But it's also a major health hazard. And this is new stuff. I mean, most people have thought about the musty smell for ages as just this aesthetic nuisance. It's the basement smell. But the data on this is fascinating. First of all, kids exposed to the musty smell have double the risk of asthma, developing asthma later. And also recent animal studies have shown that it's neurotoxic. In fruit fly studies, They found that the fruit flies stop producing dopamine, they stop reproducing, they fly down instead into the light, which is their instinctive nature. They develop mitochondrial damage, locomotor dysfunction, premature death. I mean, this is and this is just one of the compounds that's found in most of the musty odors. It's kind of a potpourri of chemicals. And anyone who's ever had mold related illness or spent time in a musty building will tell you that they didn't feel right. Cognitive impairment. Sometimes people can't go to sleep. Sometimes people can't wake up, right? It affects you in so many different ways. But the musty smell is produced by all molds during growth. So that's the key, right? Mycotoxins, 100 out of 100,000, whereas the musty smell, all of them produce this. And these chemicals, they're called MVOCs. And the M stands for microbial, and VOCs are volatile organic compounds. Now, many people listening to this have heard of VOCs. The most popular one is alcohol. Lots of people enjoy that, but we also know that it causes cognitive impairment, right? And so if you're breathing this stuff or drinking this stuff, it can cause you to have some shifts in consciousness. Some of them are pleasant and some of them are unpleasant. Gasoline is comprised of a whole suite of VOCs. Benzene, toluene, industrial solvents, bleach, the active ingredient in bleach, which is sodium hypochlorite, is a VOC. So it's liquid at one temperature, and at room temperature it evaporates. And so it's extremely important to keep your nose peeled, if you will. You want to really keep your senses acutely aware of the slightest whiff of that, because that's usually the first clue, right? Mold grows within 24 to 48 hours of a moisture problem, and the first thing will be the scent. By the time it's visible, it's been growing for a while. And so the idea here is that we have essentially over time, and we talked about this at Dragonfly, from 1945 around the World War II, after the baby boomers started there's a need for faster and cheaper building materials. We slowly started changing from these homes that were built to last to homes that are built of paper mache with sheetrock.
Ugh.
And then we tighten them up for energy efficiency, and then we slathered them with toxic chemicals, and then we wonder why we're having asthma, allergies, autoimmune disease, at skyrocketing rates. And really what it comes down to is moisture control. That's what this all comes down to. So the good news is, and here is the good news, that unlike the outdoor environment where we have very little control, the indoor environment, we have an enormous potential for control if we choose to exercise it. And so it all begins with awareness, which is what we're here for. And so the reality is that we live on a water planet, and we have a huge amount of fungi on the planet, which is usually our friend. But we need to learn how to navigate around it. Being afraid of mold, which is a very common thing, is extremely counterproductive. It's like being scared of gravity or being scared of sunlight. It is such a normal part of our environment that what I encourage people to do is think about this as something to be discerning about, to be aware of. It's like you wouldn't be afraid of sugar. You just know that you don't want to have a lot of that in your diet, right? And you also know that it's gonna make its way into your diet the same way you know that mold is going to be a part of your life at some point, right? It's up there with death and taxes. It's guaranteed. But how you navigate that is the deal. And so I encourage people to be discerning instead of fearful, because if anyone who's listening to this is going through a mold issue, I will say that I've never seen anybody truly get better until they've gotten rid of the fear.
Yeah,
Huge.
that's powerful. I mean, I think fear in general, when people are really sick, you see it, they like cling on to fear of whatever. And it's like, yeah, that's totally going to hold you back from the healing journey you need to go on.
Totally.
What you said about the buildings, like, I'm always curious, like, what did our ancestors have to deal with, right? So mold, this is not something new. Is it really the way that we're building buildings? Is that what started this new cascade? Like, was this not really an issue for humans before?
It was an issue if you lived in a cave underground, like if you were literally, if you chose badly back then, right, and you were underground in a damp space, you probably experienced mold related illness back then too, if you were,
Okay.
but because it had to do with the amount these things concentrate. So it's the dose makes the poison, right? Paracelsus, godfather of toxicology. The dose makes the poison, and actually, small amounts of mold exposure are not only not harmful, but actually beneficial for most people. So your lungs are a naked interface, and so you're getting data from this stuff. You're learning what's normal in your environment, right? So there's the hygiene hypothesis. There's the biodiversity hypothesis, but essentially, we need these microbes in our world to create protections against the nasty microbes, but also we need the data to know what's normal in our environment, because when we go outside, we're going to need to experience this stuff. But when you're indoors and this stuff is blooming and you've got lots and lots of spores, or you've got those microbial gases, then we go from medicine to poison. And so it's really the concentration of it that occurs indoors. And this is a byproduct of our building practices. First of all, the materials we use are very mold friendly. And then second of all, we have very airtight buildings. And then we've also done this crazy thing, which is where we started using toxic chemicals in our to line our buildings and put them all over our stuff. And it's just unbelievable. I mean, between the personal care products and the cleaning products and the building materials and the finishes and the stain resistant coatings, all that stuff is so outrageously toxic. And what we do is we just close it up in a box and we rebreathe it 20,000 times a day. It's literally insane. I mean, and then we wonder why we have all these statistics. So the modern building practices are at the core of why we have this hyper exposure. And also the fact our society now we don't leave buildings, right? We spend 90% of our time indoors. And we go from building to car, and then car to building. And so like there's even in our car, that new house smell, which you talked about at Dragonfly, right? This is like, this is not a good thing. And this is sweet smell. We attribute it to achievement, right? Like
it smells so good.
Smells so good, right? New house smells great. Like that renovated smell smells so good, but so does the gas station.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
Get me high. That feels good.
Yeah, yeah. But we know that that's not like a truly good smell, right? It feels good, but it's not so good.
Yeah.
And so it's that same thing that we need to sort of disassociate from that. And so it's a combination of building practices, building materials, and then social behavior. And it's like a perfect storm. I mean, it's literally a perfect storm. There's a great book called Never Home Alone, which I highly recommend to anyone who's interested in what's going on in our home below the surface here, like on the microbial level. And it's written by a guy named Rob Dunn, who's a professor at UNC, and he's so funny. But he thinks that we should rename our species Homo Indorus instead of Homo sapiens, because we've become an indoor species.
Yeah, creatures of the indoors.
Yeah, we really have. We've kind of retrenched into these synthetic shells, and then we wonder why we're having all these problems. So there's no short answer on that. It's a compounding thing.
Yeah. And I will say, like, I think I fortunately haven't suffered too badly from it, but I've always lived in new construction, like since 2004. Brand new dorm, brand new apartment, brand new house, another brand new apartment. Like, just, I love the newness. I love the modern. I'm not like a fixer upper type, but with that comes all of those exposures.
Yeah.
Germ free.
Really yeah, well, that's the other thing, right? It's too sanitized, and then it's also got these chemicals in it. And the thing about the chemicals that's interesting is that we talked about VOCs, and that's the man-made stuff, and that's what you're going to get from your paints and finishes and floorings and all that stuff, right? And then you have the MVOCs. One of the most common things that we see is people who have a lot of exposure to mold, especially if they live in a basement apartment or just a really musty space for a long period of time. They often become sensitive to chemicals. They become sensitive to fragrances. They develop what's called a toxicant-induced loss of tolerance, or TILT, which is kind of like MCS, or multiple chemical sensitivity. Claudia Miller is a researcher who's coined the term TILT, which I think is brilliant. And it's this idea, it's the opposite of addiction, where with an addiction, you need more and more and more to get lesser and lesser effect. In this case, less and less exposure actually has a disproportionately higher effect. So it's a tricky thing. And so what we see is this overlap where also people exposed to a lot of chemicals, new buildings, for example, people who live or in an occupational setting where they might be exposed to a lot of petroleum, solvents and stuff like that, they tend to become mold sensitive. So the VOC, the body goes, whoa, enough, because mold is a chemical factory, and there's just no two ways about it. If you look at it just chemically, it's a chemical factory, between the toxins it produces, and then the gases it produces. And the only problem with that is, like I said, when it's doing it indoors in a closed setting. Otherwise, it, outside it blows around. And so our ancestors had a lot of ventilation. Their buildings didn't have insulation in the walls. They weren't caulked tightly to save energy. They'd have to burn the fire constantly just to keep that area warm. Forget about the house. It was just that room that was warm, because all the heat would just disperse. Well, that also allowed pollutants to disperse. It also allowed water that gets into the walls, or water that gets in, to dry out quickly. So it's known in building science as drying potential. Our buildings have very low drying potential now, whereas before they had unbelievable drying potential, and the materials themselves didn't support fungal growth. So again, these things are just compounded on top of each other. It's not one thing in particular. It's a set of practices that over the course of the last 60, 70 years have set us up for the situation.
Yeah, makes sense.
So I'm just curious about people that are having that crossover intolerance. Is it like a hypervigilance in the system? Is it also maybe like poor detoxification? Because I know, like, I've walked into a space with someone that's had mold illness and they react and I don't. So obviously there's something different in our biochemistry. That's the alert system is totally different, right? Like, you're not guaranteed to get sick walking to that room. It depends on the environment it's coming into. So what's actually going on in the immune system? Or detoxification?
Everybody is different. It's still really an emerging field, like how this stuff really triggers you, because again, it's a chemical factory, right? So you've got, and again, taking mycotoxins and pushing that aside, because that's a conversation about mold and food really more, right? You've got a Venn diagram here. Mold and food is mycotoxins. And then you've got musty smell, spores, and some mycotoxins, and then they overlap. And that overlap is what I call overload, right? And so there's a combination of things I think that's happening here. First of all, mold affects you all across allergic pathways, inflammatory pathways, and then of course, toxicity at higher level. That toxicity can be from the musty smell, because of course these are solvents in large amounts. These things are very deleterious to human health. And then of course the mycotoxins, which you're eating in your diet. And so these things compound on top of each other again. And so there's interesting evidence, because there's a sort of a fourth thing, which is this fight or flight response that a lot of people with mold sensitivities have, and it evokes this adrenal response, or a shutting down. And like, for example, people with chronic sinusitis or asthmatics, what is their body doing when they're having an exposure? Their body's saying, I can't have any more of that, right? The asthma
protect.
Protect. So stop that. And it shuts down. Well, this is really an impractical physical response, right? You kind of need to keep operating.
Maybe overachieved.
And so that's in many ways, that's the body's way of panicking, and saying, like, we need to save you at the cost of your own life. We're going to save your life by stopping this breathing thing.
Thanks, body.
Thanks a lot. With friends like you, who needs enemies? But and this thing happens, I think, with there are nerves in the face, that trigeminal nerve in particular, that is considered to be a primary source of irritation for these things, and that kicks right into the autonomic nervous system. And so the body just goes, whoa, okay, we got to get out of here, right? And so it's kind of that fight or flight. It's like, get out of here, just leave the building. And all sorts of inflammation pops up. And so then next thing you know, you got the triggers on these other pathways, especially the inflammatory and the allergic pathways, which are highly tied into the autonomic nervous system, right? So these things are the compensatory response to this fight or flight thing that is so visceral. That's what precedes these other interactions and causes all of this sort of this cascade of symptoms. And that's why these people become so fearful. And I say these people, I am one of those people, right? Like, I grew up like this. And so I don't mean to sound like, the other, because it's not other. It's, it's anyone who's been exposed to this understands what it's like to feel like your life is at risk for being in a building where everyone else feels fine, or other people are not nearly as affected.
Or you're the crazy one. We got to move Airbnbs or hotel rooms. Like, this is your fault.
Yeah. And it's also, it's very isolating, and it's enough to make, that's enough to make you crazy anyway, is
Sure.
feeling as if you're marginalized. And it happens all the time. You have 5 people living in a house, one person's got major symptoms. It gets marginalized. You know, finally someone entertains the idea of having an inspection or testing done. They find something that gets remediated, and it's the person with the major symptoms feels better immediately, you know, and then suddenly you talk to the other people and they go, you know, I'm sleeping through the night, and, you know, I'm not quite as pissed off as I was. And, you know, I'm not blowing my nose, you know, every 15 minutes. Suddenly they had symptoms that they weren't equating to this, because their baseline of their health had gone to a point where they accepted that as normal.
Yep.
And they didn't realize
Yeah,
that
for sure.
their indoor air, which you breathe again 13 to 15 times a minute, 20,000 times a day, and now all day, because we don't leave the house, is your largest environmental exposure, but it's hiding in plain sight, and you can't touch it, taste it, or smell it, or feel it until it's too bad, or there's not enough of it. And so it's really tricky stuff. It's like you can't smell your own breath, right? You know, like we're so close to it that unless you do that, right? But otherwise you don't know. We're so close to it that unless you focus on it and really make this a point of awareness, air is an afterthought. But it has this overwhelming impact on us, such that when you get it straight, I believe that healthy indoor air is the #1 biohack. You know, it is the underlying biohack of all biohacks, right? Get your air straight, get your water straight, get your food straight, and then you can build on that, you can optimize. But if you don't get your air straight, nothing, you can't supplement, you can't nourish, you can't affirm or meditate your way out of that. You know, it is that fundamental.
Yeah. Well, I mean, oxygen itself, right? I mean, a lot of biohackers say, you know, breath work is the #1 biohack or whatever, because we can't go without breathing. We can go a while without water. We can go a while without food, but we're talking about breath work. But yeah, what are you inhaling? That makes perfect sense. I mean, that's like your first offense.
Totally.
There.
I'm going to a breathwork class tonight. I'm definitely going to be on alert. Like if I walk in and smell, I'm out of there. I'm going to go do breathwork in the park.
Which is where it should be done, probably, you know. I mean,
probably, but you know, New York City in the winters, like, what are we supposed to do? You know?
Yeah, totally. And New York City's tough too. You know, cities are tough in general because, you know, you have very little control over the buildings, and they're often old with built, you know, based on antiquated building codes and lackluster ventilation, and, you know, and
no ventilation in the bathroom.
You don't even have the passive vent that one little vent.
I do. I don't think it does very much. Well, you just said passive. I guess explain it to me. It doesn't seem like it's doing anything.
There should be a fan on the roof that's connected to a stack that goes all the way down, and all the kitchens and bathrooms all connect to it. But the reality is that they get disconnected, they fall apart, and the fan's often turned off because they're trying to save electricity, right? So those things usually don't work. What you do is you take a piece of toilet paper and go put it up next to it, and if it sticks to the thing, then it's working.
Mine's not working.
Yeah. Well, so you have no ventilation. Yeah.
No, we have the vent. There's no ventilation through the vent. It's just for show, apparently. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I lived in an apartment like that in the city too. And it's tough. I mean, you know, mold on the ceilings, and, you know, it's inevitable, right? So this comes down to, you know, you've got to be even more vigilant in a situation like that. No doubt.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Renee.
Oh, I was just gonna say, Jason, you seem like you're kind of like the canary in the coal mine. Like Lauren, you were saying, like, why do some people react? But would you say you're the canary in the coal mine? That's why you've been more aware of this?
I think I was. I'm no longer, and that's a testament to the human immune system and our adaptability. And also, I think I was fortunate enough to get out of it before adolescence, or, you know, before the hard wiring really kind of kicked in. So, you know, when I was 4 years old, I was falsely diagnosed with cystic fibrosis, and I was allergic to literally everything in my environment. So it was everything. Every single test that they tested me for was positive. And my dad said that when he saw me they put you in a papoose, like a straitjacket for toddlers, you know, and with the exposed back, and then they draw grid on your back and do the antigens. And my dad said I looked like a ladybug, just like red swollen back with dots all over it.
Oh, wow.
So I lived on inhalers, and this stuff called breathine. It wasn't even an inhaler. It was before inhalers. It was like a crushed up pill. It was like inhaling powder. It was disgusting. And then when my folks split up and moved out when I was 12, and all my symptoms went away. And I never had to use an inhaler again, not allergic to anything, except for bad attitudes. I still break out in hives, lawyers too sometimes, but you know, depends.
You're not alone.
but it was completely dismissed as adolescent remission at the time. My grandfather had grown out of his asthma as well. And so fast forward, I ended up, my mother died suddenly when I was 14, suicide, which is relevant to this story actually. And then 15, I was diagnosed with Lyme disease, which disproportionately affects those with mold sensitivities. And the science behind that's still not really well understood. Biotoxin, detoxification pathways, there's a bunch of different stuff going on there. And I actually think antibiotics have a lot to do with it too. The antibiotics are the primary tool for that, and antibiotics are primarily fungal and or bacterial toxins in a concentrated amount. And so I have a feeling that there might be a relationship there, but that's poorly understood. And then I ended up through a crazy series of events. I ended up dropping out of high school and working full time at the gas station and saving money to get my GED and start college early. And I got recruited out of the gas station by a guy who worked on Wall Street. And a year later, I was a stockbroker, and somehow or another ended up being the youngest licensed stockbroker in history with a Guinness World Record. So that was crazy. But I know that you guys have a Guinness World Record too, don't you?
Oh no, I knew this was coming.
Fake news.
I was called out for saying that I had a World Guinness Record at Dragonfly. Jason was like, "You do?" Because I do. I was like, "Oh shit, you actually do." And that's really amazing, especially at a gas station. Were you just there like trying to smell the fumes? Should we all go there and like risk the VOCs? Maybe
VOCs, man, you know, there's sometimes you just got to run into the fire, you know, and just don't light a match at the gas station.
Right.
But it was one of those things. I do very well in garages too. I was later recruited by Mario Gabelli, who's a self-made billionaire, at the parking garage where I was getting my car about 7 years later, and went to go work for him. So I do really well in garages apparently. But I had gotten very disenchanted though. 9 years on Wall Street will do that to anybody. And my mom had raised me to really focus on contribution to the greater good. My mom was a nurse, gave to a fault. I mean, she was just she had the servant's heart, which was part of her downfall. But I would volunteer at the hospitals where she worked during the summer. I think she mostly had me go there so I didn't burn the house down. But I learned a lot about, you know, people in need and the joy of service. And so Wall Street didn't really ring true to that, you know? And so when I decided that I was done with it after the dot-com bubble burst, I went traveling. And while I was away, I read a story about a guy who'd gotten sick from the hotel where he was an employee, and he blamed the mold. He developed adult onset asthma and allergies to everything. And I was like, oh, that sounds familiar. It's kind of my life in reverse, you know? And so called my dad from a payphone, which probably isn't there anymore, and said, hey, do you think we had mold at Old Trenton Road? And he's like, of course, we had mushrooms in the basement. Why do you ask? And
wow.
Yeah, typical 1970s parent, right? Just
yeah, it's awesome.
You don't need those, you know, like
my God.
Here's some more red dye for you in your cereal, and here it's some more.
Eat your fruit snacks and hush.
And put some sugar on top of it.
I mean, really, it's amazing we all survive.
Resilient.
So I immediately became fascinated with the idea that buildings can make you sick. That is an idea that had really captured my attention, and still to this day drives me, because I think that it's a blind spot for most people. The relationship with your building, I think it's the most important relationship you have in terms of your health and longevity. It's like an exoskin or an exoskeleton. And I like to joke around. We're a little bit like hermit crabs in the sense that we don't do very well without our shell. But it's also something that we just completely disregard. Is these static boxes. You live, work, and store your stuff in it, and you buy and sell it. Maybe you make some money, maybe you don't. It's a crucial part of your immune system. And that's why I laugh at it. You would never paint your body with the paints that you paint your walls with, right? But you end up inhaling. It becomes part of your body anyway. So you have to think about it the same way with your personal care products. If you care about your personal care products, think about your building the same way. It's like it's a skin. And it's also immediately transmits into your lungs, which then there's no filter. You are the filter. You are an air filter. Think about that. So whatever is there, if it's healthy, nutritious air with oxygen, which is a fuel, and it's detoxifying, and it's energizing, and it's a nutrient. We breathe 30 pounds of air every day. Isn't that crazy? 30 pounds of air. And I read that once, and I said, how does he come up with that? So I took I took a balloon. I grabbed the jeweler's scale. I brought my 4-year-old son over, and I said, check this out. We weighed the balloon, tared it, blew the balloon up, weighed the balloon. Sure enough, 0.6 grams, do the math on it. It's 30 pounds of air, 28 pounds or something like that. So it is, you're consuming air. You're not breathing it. You're consuming it. Right.
Yeah.
And so you start thinking about it that way as a nutrient, then, think about it the same way with the food, right? Empty calories, or poisonous calories versus nutritious, delicious, sustaining calories. And it's the same thing with air. It's just a different perspective,
It's really ludicrous when you say it like that and you talk to people. It's like, we're consuming toxins. You're like, no, I don't drink alcohol or eat processed food. The air that you breathe, I'm just thinking of my air doctor that's in the corner. If I open that filter, it's just black. And I'm hoping that it's, saving me from breathing some of that in. But if we could compare lungs to that, and you're right, we obsess over our beauty care products. I suppose that a lot of people don't even want to consider it because it's harder to change those circumstances, right? Not everyone can just get up and move tomorrow.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of, first of all, when I say these things to a lot of people, they shut down, right? Because there's either a budget constraint or some other limitation, husband, wife, boss, whatever, landlord, just general
resistance.
Logistic.
Don't tell me. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't want to hear about the food too. I mean, you talk about people, you guys know this, you talk to people about their food, you might as well be talking about religion or politics.
Oh yeah. Don't eat peanuts. Oh God, no.
What are you
Don't take my peanuts away from me.
Right. My eggs, like I had that because I had to stop eating eggs because of food sensitivity. I just learned that it was causing me joint pain. And that was a grieving process, man. When I was first, I was looking at that going, no, don't tell me I can't eat eggs,
Eggs is the worst.
Yeah. It's
a hard
so
one.
fun.
It's a hard one.
And they're delicious, and they're supposed to be the perfect food. And so, people get, so when people are presented with this, they can look at this as an opportunity or an obstacle. And I think that initially it's like agreeing, you have to go through this process where you recognize that, okay, fine, this is literally table stakes. This is like fundamental. And then as soon as you realize that you have a lot of control, but the problem is most people don't know what to do. They don't have the next steps. It just seems like this, because it's nebulous by definition. Air, is there anything more nebulous than air? And so this is a very difficult thing. And there's so much crap out there. You want to go online and look up, holy crap. I mean, there is so much junk science. I mean, there are air purifiers out there that don't actually purify the air, that create particles. I've tested air purifiers like these Auric air machines that produce more particles than they remove. I've even seen similar things with the molecule. The original.
Can we ask you about Air Doctor on the air? Maybe I don't want to know.
Yeah,
I know that was my next question.
They're one of our partners actually, and I only partner with companies that I've tested. I've got I got all sorts of fun gadgets and stuff. This is a laser particle counter, and so this actually measures the airborne particulate matter down to 0.3 microns. And so I test these things. Yeah, no, this is a fun toy.
Yeah, we've ragged on the molecules before. I'm like, they made them real pretty and just pulled people in, but I don't think.
Yes, great marketing, VC backed marketing engine. And if you ask them about their science, they will provide you with studies that they paid for that have very questionable data points. And so listen, the bottom line is air filters filter air. They don't kill stuff. They don't zap stuff. Zapping stuff creates other particles. Think about this. You're burning you don't vaporize it, right? We know this, that matter can't be created or destroyed. Energy can't be created or destroyed. It changes form. So where does it go? It doesn't just become like pure air. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense.
I never thought of it that way.
And even the VOCs are complex molecules in many cases. And when you smash them, they break apart into their different constituents, and then they like to reform into different stuff. They've got attractions to each other, right? And so they'll reform. And one of the most common things they reform into is formaldehyde, which is not what you want in
Yum.
your building. So
Lovely.
So yeah, so there's just the unintended consequences. If you want to clean your air, the same way you clean your house, you remove the dirt, you remove the particles, you remove the sources of these things. And that's what a filter like Air Doctor does. It's got a physical media and a fan that blows air through the media, which captures the particles, and then it goes through the HEPA filter will capture the particles, and then it goes through the carbon, which is that dark heavy layer, and that captures the VOCs. And then on the other side of that, you have air that's been purified at least to the point of 99.75% reduction in particles according to HEPA. That's the HEPA standard. The VOCs, that thing can get saturated depending upon the VOC levels in your house. So you got to watch those, and you got to replace those more regularly than the HEPA. But I'm a big fan of Jasper air purifiers, who's Mike Feldstein, amazing guy, amazing company. And that's on the high end. I love Air Doctors. I've got them all over my house. I also love Medify Air, Medify. They have some really affordable units, for small apartments. They have units for under $100 that actually they do a great job. So there's the point is that there's a range, right, from $100 to $2,000, and but the stuff that has kill claims, any air purifier that has kill claims that it destroys or kills is off the list. That's the red flag, right? Anytime it says no filters to replace, off the list. This is
Fake news.
Ionic Breeze.
Okay.
Remember the Ionic Breeze?
Yeah.
Yeah, Sharper Image. That's what put them out of business, was fighting with the Consumer Reports about their claims and Consumer Report, and they fought with them, and they ultimately collapsed under their own weight. The Ionic Breeze is, Molecule and Ionic Breeze are the same category for me. I think they're better boat anchors than they are air purifiers, right? And that's how they should be used.
Great.
Wow. This is reminding me of a story I just read about the other day. Like, we know that they're making yoga pants out of recycled plastic, right? Like, it's kind of old news, but I just read this news story about they found this new technology where they're burning plastics to then recycle them into clothing and home care stuff. I'm like, oh my God, that's like next level toxic.
Yeah.
But it's supposed to be this green, sustainable, like we're saving the planet. It's kind of scary.
I saw Katrine posted something the other day about microplastics in clouds. They're testing microplastics up in the clouds. I don't know how they're doing that, but so maybe it's partially because of that. They're burning the plastic, and it's.
I think we're doing a lot of wrong things.
We are. And, the good news is that in time, the earth will be fine. It will digest all this stuff after it bucks us off its back, and gets rid of the parasite that's causing all the problems. There are no problems in this world except for the ones that humans create. There are no problems.
Yeah.
I mean, zero.
Yeah.
The only problems are the ones that we either perceive or create, and the stuff that we're doing, the way we still think we have to burn stuff for energy, and then we unfortunately our chemical companies produce our food, our drugs, and our building materials. That's the reality, and the chemical companies, something's a little off there, there's something to be said about like bringing that back in and saying, well, let's look at these things individually and evaluate our choices. And so we know food is a big deal, right? And so you've got to, globalization has brought this thing where we have now, we import what you want berries. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be spring, doesn't have to be, it doesn't matter. You get them from Peru.
We'll find them.
We'll find them, or from Mexico, and so they're on a shipping container for a bit. They're probably coming in from air, the berries, but a lot of these foods, we learned from in the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine that Ukraine was the breadbasket of the world, right? We learned that, and that a lot of those ships got held at port. But so they're getting all this wheat, right? They're cleaning it, and then they're or threshing it rather, and then processing it, and then they put it on a shipping container for 30 days. It's not conditioned, it's not refrigerated, right? And then it comes over here. So there's really strong evidence, in food scientists are very well aware of this, that 60 to 80% of our imported grains are contaminated with mycotoxins. 60 to 80%. And so, but it's not just grains. It's also, it's nuts, seeds, spices, fermented meats, on the casings, everyone's probably seen that.
What spices are high risk?
Almost any spice that comes from a third world country, believe it or not, because what they do is they don't process them with the same methods that we do, right? They're often harvested in the wild, left on the ground to dry, right? And so there's no controls around this, right? They're not grown in a, they're not grown. I mean, we would do it like a factory here, which it's got its own issues, but the way they do it is kind of like the other way around. And so these spices tend to get moldy quickly, right? Because they're just leaves, right? And what we started the conversation about, what does mold do? It breaks down dead plant matter. And by the way, mold also grows within 24 to 48 hours of a moisture problem. So and the spores are already there because the spores are abundant in our world. Kingdom fungi, check this out, produces 50 megatons of spores every year. That's the equivalent of 500,000 blue whales. And to put it in further context, that's 25 times as much tea as the entire world drinks every year. And that's just spores that you can't see with your naked eye that are being propelled into the atmosphere. Most of them land on mountains and oceans and fields and all that stuff. But they're also landing on all the spice plants and and that's why you don't need to actually, wine was developed because the spores are already on the grapes. You don't need to actually put the fungi into grapes to ferment it. It's already there. Wheat, same kind of thing, right? So they're already there. And so you just mash it up and let the magic happen. And so when you take these, when you harvest spices, for example, and they're not being done in a very climate controlled way, everything is there. And if the dampness is there, let's say it rains for a few days. Well, these are, verdant areas where the stuff is growing. That's why they grow so well. And so, if they're not controlling the moisture really well, then you can be sure that there are issues there. And then they grind them up and you'll never see it. You'll never know. And then, so a lot of actually what the mycotoxin exposure that's coming in from preserved meats is actually from the spices on the meats. So isn't that wild? Yeah. So it's, yeah. So it's best to source these things as best you can from locally, grow it yourself, local sources. Of course, you can't do that with cumin and some of these more saffron, but that's not really subject to. And by the way, you're never going to eat that much saffron anyway. But there are certain things that you have to source internationally, and so you just want to make sure that you're dealing with the highest quality, right? You don't want to buy the cheapest stuff. That's for sure.
Yeah.
What about saffron that's being put into like mental health supplements, like psychobiotics or supplements for mental wellness?
Saffron was not the best example because if you've ever seen it, and this is a great thing, if you ever want to see something really fascinating, look up how saffron is harvested. It's beautiful. It's all women who and they have to go out at a specific time in the morning because the flower opens up and they hand harvest the little pieces out of flowers. It's the most delicate, beautiful thing you've ever seen. And so they're not really subject to this kind of dynamic where it's like leaves being harvested, thrown in a pile, let it dry. But if you really want to check something out that's beautiful, that's still being done to this day, check out how saffron is harvested.
Cool.
But so, and I wouldn't worry too much about that. But you start looking at things like black cumin seed oil, which is a very popular topical and ingested these days. And who knows? Who knows? I mean, these things are not tested as much as they should be. They do test some stuff at the port, but the regulations are very lax about that. And it's very expensive. Mycotoxin testing is like $400 a sample, and also it's not homogeneous. So you can have some, a 5-pound bag of something, and you test the top of it, and you get one reading. You test the bottom of it, and you get a different reading. It's not homogeneous. So it's in one shipment from another, and it's just. There's great inconsistencies with these things. Hopefully, we've got some new technology emerging. We'll be able to with spectrometry, which is like these lasers where you can actually identify these things on the spot, and that's coming. It's like Star Trek. The future is now, and it's coming. Cool. And hopefully, but the most important thing is it's local. If on the food thing, because the food exposure, when I get these people who call up and they say, "I've got my mycotoxin report here. I've got mold in my body." My standard response is probably not, because mold doesn't grow in your body. Yeasts can, but mold is aerobic. It requires oxygen. They're obligate anaerobes, obligate aerobes rather. So they require oxygen. So they're not going to grow well in your gut, right? Now, yeasts and things like that can, but molds can't. The mycotoxins are showing up in these urine reports are very clearly agriculturally originating from agriculture. Ochratoxin A is a very common one. Zealanone, the vomitoxin, DON, you'll see that a lot. These are not produced from molds that grow in buildings. I've never seen a fusarium infestation in the thousands of houses that I've done testing for, but fusarium grows very nicely on corn and wheat and oats and things like that. And so we see this where there's a conflation, where you got these two ideas that seem like they line up. And we do this all the time. People do this. This is our new truth in our society, right? We just take ideas and string them together and then make a story. And so the same thing with mycotoxins and stuff. So if you really want to look at it, you have to identify, if you want to get better from this stuff, you have to get your building straight. Well, the detoxing. First step in detoxing is to stop toxing. And so the first step is get your building straight. You got a lot of control of that. Get your diet straight. Get rid of the no sugar, no grains. That's why a lot of people do better on keto right away. It's a combination of getting rid of the processed stuff will make everyone feel better anyway. But you're also getting rid of mycotoxins, and it's hidden. You'll never be able to know it. And then the real hidden one is restaurants. So anytime you're going out, think about this. All the meats that we're getting are all raised in factory farms. If you're going to a restaurant, unless it says grass-fed, it's not. Unless it says organic pastured, it's not. So you have to assume if it's not labeled with the special designations, it's conventional factory farm stuff. And that meat is, and especially conventional dairy, because the mycotoxins are lipophilic, which means the fat loving. And so they get lodged in the fats and they excrete through the mammary glands. And so they're concentrated actually in dairy. And heat doesn't kill these things. Mycotoxins are extremely heat resistant. And so what you have is something called carryover effect, where the animal eats moldy grains, because of course they're not eating grass like they're supposed to. They're eating crappy corn that's GMO and sprayed with glyphosate. And you know what I mean? It's like horrible. The more you look at it, you go, that's our food.
Yeah.
They're spraying poisons to make sure that it lasts a long time on the shelf so that someone can buy it, but it's not treated as food. It's treated as a product, like a car or a mug or just these inanimate things, not this life-giving source of nutrients, right?
Yeah. Information for our physiology. It's very bad information.
Yeah.
Really bad information, right? And it's no wonder that we're also responding, adversely to exposures to mold when we're eating the stuff and our body is going, whoa, okay, I'm not, it's the allostatic load, you guys, where you get this toxin load that builds up, and eventually there's a straw that breaks the camel's back. And then people blame that straw, but they're not looking at this incredible accumulation of other stuff that's going on between air, water, and food and shelter, right? All these components that all add up. And then you go, mold just destroyed my life. Well, mold was the thing that woke you up, and hopefully leads you on a healing journey where you can start looking at the other exposures that you have that have accumulated, that have created that sensitivity, that laid the groundwork for you to become hypersensitive, because it doesn't happen accidentally. I mean, it does happen accidentally, but it doesn't happen spontaneously. It is something that's cumulative in my experience.
Right. Yeah. We always say there's not one root cause to why you got sick. There's multiple root causes, and you're right. Mold is just quite often the one to blame. So I'm curious with the home stuff. I mean, the food that's all mind blowing. Definitely something we need to address, but what about in the home? How do we know if we have something we need to address? Like, this is a question from the girl that lives in the dry desert. Do we all need to worry about this? Should we all test our homes?
Well, I of course I'm in the business of selling test kits, right? Like that, or selling diagnostic tools for this. And so I'm biased toward more data. I'm a data guy. And
you're a biohacker.
Yeah. And I think the stuff you should inform your decisions with actual data, because it's available. Before it was available, then you had to operate more on intuition and stuff like that. But that's when people always ask me, what's the best mold test? And I always answer, you are the best mold test. If you are willing to, recapture the control or recapture your own trust, because so many people have just handed it over to the medical institutions. They've just the doctor will tell me if something what's wrong with me, right? And so I always encourage people to get in tune with your senses. And so if you see something, smell something, or feel something, do something. And so you want to be aware. Again, this is the extension of your immune system, your home, right? The same way you would with your body, you want to, if you see a bump on your body, you're going to want to do something about that, right? If there's a really bad scent coming from somewhere on your body, you might want to take a look at that, right? So with the building, you're looking for any signs of moisture. So that would be stains, discoloration, blistering paint, signs of critters that like moisture, because of course we all need water, right? And so like water bugs are a big clue. And you'll see the little those little guys that roll up in a ball, those nasty guys. And also spider webs are a dead giveaway, because of course the spider webs at the top of that little food chain. And so the mold spores get eaten by the dust mites get eaten by the book lice, and then the spiders eat those guys. And then, so you got this whole chain, this ecosystem, and it all begins with moisture, right? It's like a pool party, everyone's invited. And so the outward manifestation is other life forms proliferating in your building. And so you're looking for any signs of moisture. And so, by the way, trim pulling away from the wall, where you've got expansion and contraction happening, and you've got these are the kinds of things you want to look for. Warped flooring that's uneven, tiles coming loose. You want to watch out for missing caulk and grout around your shower. People always worry about the mold on the grout or caulk. I'm looking for the missing grout and caulk, because the water gets behind there, and then next thing you know, you got a really serious problem. So it's all about moisture, right? Mold is not the problem, by the way. Mold is a symptom of a moisture problem. If you want to go root cause, okay, if you really want to go root cause, it's moisture. It's excess moisture. Mold is just the byproduct of that. It's the guaranteed, like death and taxes. Stuff gets wet and stays wet for a couple of days, it gets moldy. And so that's your first clue. In fact, I would argue that the musty smell is mold's benevolent way of saying, hey, I'm here. There's an imbalance.
Yeah. Pay attention.
Yeah. In fact, this is a kind of a fun experiment. So I'll explain the see it, smell it, feel it. The smell is obviously the musty smell. And then the feel is any symptoms that seem to get better when you leave the building. That's a first clue. Now, if you're spending too much time in the building, if you don't know if you feel better when you leave, then you probably need to get out more. But ultimately, this is about saying, well, something's not right. And then acting on that and trusting your intuition, getting back to this, we are an amazing integrated array of precision sensors. That's what humans are, right? It's incredible what we have. And if we can just trust that, nature's done a pretty good job so far. What we have done to screw it up is a different conversation. But
we're toxic. And if you have a toxic burden, your intuition's probably not talking to you.
And that's
again, harder for others.
It's much harder. Because again, the fear is really what blocks a lot of that too. It's hard to know the difference between intuition and fear. And my experience has been that fear tells you a story. Intuition gives you a single idea, one word, it's a very simple thing. But fear tells you stories. And if you're telling stories, you're in fear. If your gut tells you it's a yes, no. It's a simple monosyllabic, very clear message. But if you're telling stories, you're in fear. So the see it, smell it, or feel it, that's the symptom. But here's a kind of a fun thought experiment. So I talked about building as an extension of your immune system, which I love thinking about. And if you look at the building, you could even think of the building as an organism. You could think the HVAC system is the respiratory system, right? The electrical system is like the nervous system. The plumbing is like the circulatory system. And then what's the immune system? Or the siding is like dermis. If you actually look at the cross section of a building, with the siding and the insulation, the fat, right, and then the bones or the studs, you can really see. And by definition, if you look it up in Webster's, an organism is a system of life-sustaining systems. essentially, right? Likened to a living creature. And so that's like the second definition. And so, so I'm not the first person to probably think about this way, but and then I think about the immune system, and well, where's that? Well, that's you. You're the immune system. Buildings have a birthday and potentially a death day, and the longevity is largely driven by how well you care for it, right? You are the immune system. And if in the musty smell studies with the fruit flies, mitochondrial damage was one of the most interesting parts for me. And so I would actually think liken us to the mitochondria in our building, right? So we're the powers, we're the ones creating all, making sure everything works, and and maintaining things. If we're doing it well, then the building's healthy. And when we fail to do that, the building gets sick. And when the building gets sick, we get sick. And then when the building heals, we heal. And the building gets sick through aches and pains that develop usually over time due to maintenance issues, and water gets in, right? Buildings fail usually with shedding wind and water. That's where they begin to fail. And so when the water gets in, it develops like inflammation. That's mold. Mold is the first sign of a building's inflammation. And the musty smell is that pain signal saying, hey, I need some attention over here. And so I would argue that mold's actually giving you a little warning saying, hey, I'm ready. I'm going to eat your house. So you got to do something about this. And if you don't, then it becomes chronic dampness, which is chronic inflammation, right? And chronic inflammation is its own disease. And you keep letting that go, and eventually it becomes cancer in the building, which is rot. And then buildings collapse. They literally die from being left to allow that acute inflammation, chronic inflammation, ignore it. And we've seen this with people where they do that same thing, right? Ignore it. And next thing you know, you're reading about them in the obituaries. And so the same thing happens here with our buildings. So our relationship with our building is symbiotic. It needs us, we need it. And so, we love to anthropomorphize cars and boats and stuff, if people put their names on it. And I would love I want to introduce the idea of naming our homes like they do in the UK, name your home, get personal with it, and get to know it, right? You've developed it. You are in an intimate relationship with it. Whether or not you're engaging at that level or not, is a matter of awareness and perspective.
Yeah.
Love that analogy so much. And you've really made it sound like mold can be a gift, but often, we see it as a sign or a symptom we're just supposed to kill or blow up or ignore, just like most signs and symptoms in health, but such a gentle warning sign, perhaps.
I think mold is a gift. Listen, mold is amazing stuff. I mean, if you look at this, the more I know about mold, the more amazed I am. It's brilliant. There's genius in every single spore. It has a library of enzymes that it can produce depending upon what material it lands on. And so what single cell do you know that has a library of resources, and that knows exactly what to do and just does it in this beautiful, elegant way. And if you look at it microscopically, it's beautiful too. And it's just this thing that we've set a stage. It's like if you actually invited, just left your front door open. And suddenly homeless people they just came in and moved in and started eating all your stuff in your fridge, and next you're like, what are they doing here? But the door's open and you haven't done anything about this. And eventually they're going to actually have rights, you're not going to be able to get rid of them. And so
it's like the leaky gut analogy. All are welcome in your gut.
You let them in.
And wait a second. It was implicit. It was implied that they were welcome. The door was open. And we do the same thing by building our buildings out of paper mache, closing stuff up. Water gets in, doesn't get out. The stuff gets wet, gets moldy very quickly. And then we're like, why mold's killing me? Well, no, you are. Our society, this whole thing is set the stage. Now people hearing this, you have no excuse. People who don't know this stuff, they have plausible deniability. But now you can't unsee this, I hope. And that's my goal. My goal is to be the thing you can't unsee when it comes to this. So, and engaging this in a benevolent or in a productive manner, right? Because there's an opportunity here to turn this into a positive. And I also think that the positive to this is that the more people get sick from it, the more people talk about it, the more people are aware of it, and then change can happen. And then, you know, when you're doing a renovation, you can use a paperless wallboard. You don't need to use the crappy paper mache stuff that they sell at Lowe's and Home Depot. You know, you can use no VOC products. They're available now. You know why? Because the consumers have started to demand it. The same reason Walmart is the largest purveyor of organic food now. It's not because they thought it was good for us. It's to meet consumer demand. And so if you want to be part of this change, it begins with awareness, and then it begins with making better decisions at the checkout, at the register, right? And demanding that you just don't buy that stuff. And then it doesn't get sold. And then they either put something else on the shelf or someone else does. And so that's the way change occurs in our society. It's through conversations like this, and then action by the individual.
Yeah. Ooh, so powerful. So I want to talk about the testing. So if we see something, feel something, smell something, or if we've had, I don't know, rain or something fell on our house and there's been an exposure, how do we test? When do we test?
Yeah. So obviously anytime that there's water damage, you know, the key to the stuff is you got to move quickly. 24 to 48 hours is what the EPA says. And then the industry standard for mold remediation says anything that gets wet and stays wet, that's porous and absorptive, that stays wet for 72 hours has to be treated like mold, whether you see it or not. So it's a very short period of time. And by the way, insurance will pay for water damage, but it doesn't pay for mold. So if you have homeowners and this is an event that you need to deal with, this is something you do not want to wait for, because the prices go through the roof and it's a cash pay on the mold side. On the water damage side, insurance will pay almost to like the replacement cost of your building, but you got to get to it fast. So that's a word to the wise here. Now, let's say that you've gotten the musty smell, right? Something's happened, right? You see something, you smell something, you feel something. What do you do? Well, first of all, you want to find the source of moisture, and you want to test the air to see whether or not you've got high spore counts, which would indicate that you've got actual airborne mold in the building. And this is a really important, especially with symptoms, because a lot of people will have sort of, you know, especially if they've got upper respiratory, if they've got, you know, any sort of acute reaction to the building, that air testing is the first line of defense. So we have a test kit that we sell that uses spore traps, which are these round precision engineered cassettes that capture the airborne particles. And so we created an air sampling pump that duplicates a professional pump. So if you want to have your house tested right now and you called a professional, they'd come over with, you know, all sorts of tools and equipment, flashlights and moisture meters and infrared thermal imaging, hopefully. And, you know, maybe you're lucky and you get a mold sniffing dog, which was my favorite tool. But then after that inspection, then they're going to want to do some testing, because of course you can't assess this with the naked eye. And so they'll pull out an air sampling pump on a tripod, and then these cassettes get placed on top, and then the air gets drawn through the cassettes, and then that gets shipped to a lab, and then a lab analyzes it. And so it begins with an outside air sample, because mold spores, again, there's how many? 50 megatons of spores every year, right? So spores are abundant in our environment, and so they're welcome, but our indoor air should look a lot like outdoor air. Our indoor air should look a lot like, I'm going to repeat that again. You want nature in your home. You want all the spores and all that good stuff from outside. You just don't want anything growing in your house. That's the big difference, right? So spores are okay to a degree, but no mold growth of significance in the building. And so the way you assess that is by an indoor-outdoor comparison. So our test calls for an outdoor air sample, and then indoor samples in the areas where you're concerned. And so each sample is only 5 minutes. So if you get a 3-room kit, you're done in half an hour. And most of the work is being done by the pump. It's super easy. And our air sampling pump here, I have one right here. So this is our cute little air sampling pump. This replaces a $1,000 calibrated professional piece of equipment. And so these cassettes fit on here, and you have to take the tabs off like this, like so, boom. Put it on here, run it for 5 minutes, and when it's done, you put this back in the box that it came from, drop it in the mail. It goes to Eurofins, which is the #1 lab in the world, and then they do analysis, and you get a report back in 3 business days, color coded, so you get a green, yellow, orange, or red indicator, the types of mold found, in what concentrations. It's all, like I said, color coded, so it's very intuitive, and then you also have some follow-up recommendations, how to find an inspector in your area, how to find a remediator in your area. We have an ebook which is filled with inspection checklists and FAQs for people that are early on in their mold journey, that we give for free, and some other self-assessment tools, stuff like that. So it's it's not just what's there, it's also sort of a launching pad for next steps, and for actions to be taken. What we did was we decided to take all the bad parts out of testing and the other kind of junk science kits that are out there, and also made it really consumer friendly. So our prices include lab fees and shipping both ways. We even send it with fresh new brand name batteries. So literally, when you get the kit, you can test immediately. There's nothing else to purchase or pay for, nothing else to wait for. Everything's automated, so you never have to track down your results, which I know as functional health coaches, you often have to track down.
Where did it go?
Report, you don't have that problem with us. So
That's
it's all
awesome.
completely automated. We it's important for me to say this too. We don't sell this as a replacement for a professional inspection. Nothing can truly replace a professional who's got experience. That's not the point. This is really more like a pregnancy test kit, in the sense that, you don't need to go to the doctor if you feel like something's brewing. This is a cost-effective first step. It gives you the ability to test without having to get permission from people, schedule appointments, deal with conflicts of interest, inviting the vampire into your home who might turn the data around and use this in a way that manipulates you into doing something you might not normally do, like remediation without a proper assessment. So this is a safe way to quickly assess, for a few $100. Our one-room kits are $199, two-room kits $249, three-room kits $299. So it's bite size compared to $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 for a professional inspector. You can test 4 times a year for less than the cost of one professional inspection.
That's amazing. Wow. Yeah. You've really canceled out the hurdles for a lot of people. And you brought up a good point, like people that are renting. I know, I think you and Freddie did a great episode more about the renting side of things. We can link to that, because you're not really allowed to maybe bring in an inspector in certain situations. So I love that this is just something so easy that anyone can do, for a really good price.
Yeah. We designed this for people that are mold affected too, so cognitively impaired. So the really simple instructions. It's very easy. People always think it's going to be harder than it is, and they always send me a note afterwards and go, "That was so easy. Why was I waiting? Yeah, what was I waiting for?" It's a lot easier than like the Viome test where you have to prick your finger and bleed all over the place. These are some of these tests have some challenges.
Oh my God, those lancets are awful.
Our poop tests, I mean, they're just pure joy, right? So this is so much. This is not always a pleasant subject for people, but at least we're not scooping poop and bleeding all over the place, and the results come back a lot faster than those tests too, right? I mean, you have to wait 6 weeks to get results. We have priority mail return labels, and it comes back pretty fast. But
great perspective.
Yeah. But it is really designed for people that are, renters are a market that's completely unserved by the current industry. We also have we're starting to work on a program for expectant moms, test your nest. It's a great, simple thing for people to proactively do, because it would be so nice if people would proactively do this. But most people come to us when there's a problem, and there's already fear and there's already concern, right? So what I'd like to do is get people to be proactive, but that's not the American way.
I gotta wait for the pain point.
Gotta wait for the pain point. So pregnant women are experiencing a different kind of pain. It's called anxiety, and so they like this idea, and so hopefully you can get some generational awareness too around it, which is kind of the other bigger picture, is to get people talking about this, thinking about this in a way that doesn't always necessarily it's not enshrouded in fear and anxiety. So important. That's the idea, is to get this to people, because the biggest problem with this whole space, biohacking, indoor air quality, environmental health, even just healthy living, is that it is freaking expensive. If you want to get good food, man, it's a lot, right? I mean, think about what that wonderful woman who gave the keynote at Dragonfly,
Earthane, I think her name was.
Oh yeah.
She delivers such a beautiful piece about she talked about the blackberries. Remember?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it just broke my heart. She hit us like a sledgehammer.
And we're all biohackers are obsessed with the next device.
Yeah, and
She's
so we're
amazing.
so focused on these these expensive high-end solutions, and really what it comes down to is people need to access to reliable data. They need to be able to breathe clean air, drink pure water, and eat nutritious food, and
Mhm.
that should never be cost prohibitive. That's my philosophy. These are basic
Yeah.
human needs.
Yeah.
And so basic human needs should be accessible to all, and so healthy living should not be a budget issue.
Mm.
And if we can get that straight, then then a lot of people will rise out of poverty, because I think a lot of poverty is driven by poor indoor air quality and poor nutrition. Um, and you could even argue, if you go all the way through it, you can even say, the mom who lives in the Bronx, who's got single mom who's got an asthmatic kid, the kid has an asthma attack, goes to the ER. She then has to go to the hospital. She's going to leave her job where she's making $12 an hour. She's going to get fired if that happens a couple of times. Next thing you know, the poverty cycle continues, and next thing you know, there's crime because they got to pay the bills, and so then that becomes a generational thing. And so you could even argue that poor indoor air quality leads to crime. Right. I mean, it goes all, the moldy schools, kids can't learn, teachers can't teach. Emotional dysregulation is a very common byproduct of mold and poor indoor air quality. And so, there's just so many, the impact in our society is so massive that if we could just get this stuff accessible, and the knowledge now is accessible. Everyone's got even homeless people have iPhones. You ever drive down the road and you see it's
Yeah.
amazing. Right. So
It's
it's no longer, the
amazing.
digital divide is no longer, right.
Yeah.
But now we just need to give people the access to the tools and knowledge. And so that's what I'm here for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for
Thank you.
providing this service and such a great gift and for opening our eyes. I'm just curious, real
Pleasure.
quick, can you do kind of a brief overview of the cassette difference from an ERMI test or a mold plate, which are kind of the other consumables that people know about?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I kind of classify these things into junk science and real science. Um, so Petri dishes have a place, and had a place before, especially before next generation sequencing, like DNA sequencing. And so Petri dishes will grow mold. That's what they do. They grow bacteria, they grow microbes. But because mold's ubiquitous, right? There's spores everywhere. The fact that a dish will grow mold does not indicate that there's a problem. It indicates that life lives, and that mold is a normal part of our environment. And because there's no outside reference sample, and also there's no, our spore traps and air sampling is done using something called volumetric comparison. So the volume and then the metric. So the volume of air, and then the fixed volume of air, and then a comparison between those. A Petri dish doesn't have any such meter that shows you how much air was exposed to, or how much air this dish was exposed to. And so you're depending on gravity to act uniformly and deposit particles onto a dish at that somehow or another indicates that that's indicative or representative of all the air in that space. And this is not true.
It's kind of like a stool test. Just take a little teaspoon.
Yeah. And you might
Yeah.
also find that if you sample the other part of that stool, that you might not necessarily have the same microbial profile. So it goes back to the mycotoxin test. You take some oats at the top of the bag, oats at the bottom of the bag, you might find that it looks like different bags of oats. So these things are not homogeneous. They're not evenly distributed. So the Petri dishes are problematic for that reason. The other reason is that because they always grow, they're always positive, unless you over HEPA vacuum and over filter your house, and then you've got a false negative. The truth is that all they do is show you, they just show you that there's the spores in the air. They also only grow the fastest growing molds. So the molds of greatest concern for most people that are indicative of water damage issues, and also happen to be the toxigenic species, don't grow on the kind of agar, which is the solution that's at the bottom of the dish. It's like a sweet solution. It's actually called malt extract agar. It's made from fermentation from beer, really, malt extract. The molds that are water damage molds like to eat cellulose, which is what our walls are made of. And so it's a slow growing thing. So you'll never get the kind of molds that everyone's worried about growing on those dishes. They get overgrown by the fast growing ones that land first, that are ubiquitous and abundant in our world. So they're complete junk science. There's zero value. All they do is actually create fear and anxiety. and confusion. And we need less fear, anxiety, and confusion around this subject matter. So Petri dishes are not good. ERMI, I wrote a piece about this, and I can drop that in the chat. And that is one of my favorite conversations, because ERMI is a 21-year-old test that was, it's not even a test. It's a research tool that was developed by a couple of EPA staffers. Here's the ERMI piece in the chat. If you think about 20 years ago, genomics, think about genomics, DNA technologies. Has anything improved faster than DNA in 21 years? I mean, seriously, like the work that's being done with genomics, it costs $1 billion to do the first DNA decoding when Craig Ventnor did it, and now it costs $99, right? That was 20 years ago.
Crazy.
ERMI is 20-year-old technology, and it has not been updated. It's called MSQ-PCR. It's a mold-specific quantitative polymerase chain reaction. And so this is the PCR part, is what we're used to from COVID. It's very good at finding a single organism, but it's not good at counting the organisms. It's good at telling you be present or not present. So it doesn't enumerate well.
Yeah.
And it's also the test itself, it's called environmental relative moldiness index. So that what you're talking about as a test is really an index that looks at 36 molds, 26 of which are considered to be indoor molds, which is not really true. And then 10 are considered to be outdoor background molds. By the way, all molds are outdoor molds. There are no indoor molds. There are molds that like to grow indoors, but they're all outdoor molds. And that happen to grow, some of them like to grow indoors. And so this analysis looks at these 36 molds. Well, where did they come up with these 36 molds? Well, it turns out if you go under the hood, you'll find out that it was from 32 homes in Ohio. This is not a geographically diverse data set.
No.
And then they took it and they used that same tool in 1,000 homes, 1,089 homes for a HUD study, EPA HUD study. And that's what they talk about, is 1,089 homes that they did this analysis on. And they found a correlation between high ERMI scores and asthma. I mean, no shit. Pardon my French, but like that does not take a rocket scientist to say, well, there's some high mold counts. Doesn't matter the kind of molds. And you have asthma. I mean, come on, like you don't need to spend government money or any money on that one. And so the problem with the ERMI also is that it is wildly high, because you're looking at dust reservoirs in the corner of a house. Now, if you've had a house for more than a few years, gravity works. Spores settle out of the air. If you've ever opened your window, stuff comes in and settles out. And so the fact that you have spores in your house does not mean you have growth in your house. And the reason our spore traps are different is because we're looking for airborne spores and high concentrations relative to the outside. We're not looking for a pocket of dust in the corner where you're guaranteed to have spores accumulating. And you're guaranteed almost, especially if the house has been up for a while, to have some of the molds that are considered toxigenic, because they grow outside, and they come in, and that's just the way it is, right? So they tend to be very, very high. ERMI is alarmingly high, and a lot of people say, "Oh, I use ERMI, but I don't use that index." Well, that is it. It is called the environmental relative moldiness index. So if you're not using the index, then why are you doing that test? And so it's junk science. It's junk science. And I can tell you that it's junk science, not just because of the things I just said, but I have gone into hundreds of homes following a high ERMI with mold sniffing dogs and infrared thermal imaging cameras and all the high-tech gadgetry, lots of testing. And I was only able to verify about 10% of the homes with the high ERMI scores, with conditions, actual conditions present in the building that would be commensurate or that would line up. And so that's a big reason. The Petri dishes and the ERMI are a big reason why I created the test kit, was because so many people are freaking out over the results from these two methods, that I had to be able to introduce a professional method at an affordable price, so they could at least get a gut check, and stop buy into this thing. And the other problem with this, and this is some word to the wise, anyone who's been down this road will know exactly what I'm talking about. If you get a mycotoxin test, and then your practitioner will often say, you better get your house tested. And then there's a couple of really unscrupulous companies out there whose name that will remain nameless right now, but charge like $6,000-8,000 to do an inspection. And they're using ERMI. And then they're friends with these very unscrupulous mold remediators, again, who will remain nameless right now, who want to charge $100,000 to rip a house apart, including replacing HVAC systems, which I've never had to do in 21 years. And I've healed a lot of sick homes. And so what you have here is this high reading that's actually coming from food most of the time, from the mycotoxin urine test. And then they go in, and so that's arguable. That is not building related most of the time. Now, there are cases, very visibly moldy environments where there's a lot of particles and there's a lot, you can absolutely breathe in mycotoxins. But this is not most of the cases. When I say most, I mean 95% probably. And then you do the ERMI, and well, that's always high too. And so that ensures a next step. It's a gravy train of conflation, where you take these ideas and stack them up, and they seem logical, but the science underneath it does not support this. And so that's what a lot of people are getting their lives destroyed, and they figure, why am I not getting better? I've done all the remediation. I've spent all this money. I've done all this stuff. Well, because you're eating it too, and also you're living in a VOC ridden place. And a lot of these remediators are using chemicals instead of cleaning, and they're not following industry standards. So they're actually adding chemicals to a building instead of right. So adding, insult to injury. Yeah. And so this is a really, really troubling thing. This is the kind of stuff that literally keeps me up. And people call me with these terrible stories, and it just breaks my heart. They're borrowing money to remediate a house where there's never been any mold found. They're just chasing mycotoxins. People are doing dust tests to find mycotoxins, and you find you're going to find it, but that doesn't mean you're breathing it. Presence does not equal exposure. These are not radioactive particles that are going to affect you from a distance. You have to have direct exposure to these things in significant amounts. Now, if you're really sensitive, that's a different conversation. But even so, you still have to have physical contact with this stuff in a fairly significant amount, because we're on a mold planet, So you're seeing every time you go outside, you're breathing in hundreds or thousands of spores, every single breath, with most of the time without any ill effect. And so the same thing should be happening in your indoor environment, and without any ill effect. So it's very complex. In contrast to the Petri dishes and the ERMI, our test uses evidence of airborne spores. This is what you're breathing, right? Not from the dust in the corner of the building that may have been there for 25 years, There's a big difference, right? There's a historical record there that could be useful if you wanted to, look for other stuff, including like allergens, like pests, cockroaches, and you could find a lot more there. But the stuff that they're looking at is 36 molds. And by the way, did I mention that there's 100,000 species? 36. Now today there's something called next generation sequencing, shotgun testing. We're developing a dust test to answer to this, because everyone asked me about ERMI. And so with a single dust sample, we'll be able to look for all known microbes for the same amount as an ERMI, all known microbes. So that means all bacteria and fungi. So we can and we'll classify them according to the water damage activities. So we can see on a color coded basis whether or not there's a high concentration of certain microbes, which is usually a red flag. And if there's a high concentration of water loving bacteria called actinomycetes and water loving fungi that are growing together, if there's high concentrations of those two, that means something, not a high ERMI score. If you've got a suite of microbes that love moisture and there's a high concentration in your dust relative to the other microbes, red flags, right? But ERMI, based upon these 32 homes in Ohio, 36 species, none of which have actually been proven to be a really serious problem in and of themselves, it's junk science. Junk science at its best. And it basically occupied a vacuum, because at the time when it was popularized by Dr. Richie Schumacher, the former Dr. Richie Schumacher, who promotes who promoted ERMI and Hurts Me Too, at the exclusion of all other data points, there was no other really there was no other reputable test method, you know. And
Yeah.
so, and at the time that was cutting edge science, honestly, but it hasn't been updated.
Time to
Come a long
update.
way.
Time
Yeah.
to update. Now it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
an alarmist, or
Now it's just
what we used to call a TTH, a try too hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in this case, probably not trying hard enough anymore, right? And you know, doctors are slow on this stuff too. You know,
Yeah.
doctors lag badly, 10 years at least on these things. So they're still kind of going, huh, what? ERMI? Okay, you know. So
Yeah.
we're
Thank you
trying
for that
to
clarification.
Yeah, and we're trying to we're trying to say, hey, listen, don't stop with the dust test. You can do the dust, fine, but let's look at the whole picture.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's a great article. We'll link to that in the show notes if anyone wants to read what you just mentioned, but that was great. Well,
Definitely.
Jason, I think you've given everyone a lot of food for thought, some things we all need to do. I'm going to go check my air doctor filter right now.
Yeah.
See what's
You
going
need some
on in there.
mycotoxin free food for thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, and wow, look at the time.
Right. I know
ladies.
we got to let you run, but maybe you can just give our audience one final piece of advice, something they should do today to start improving all the amazing things you mentioned.
Well, I highly recommend that people, first of all, get back to tuning your senses, right? And learn to trust yourself. So if you see something, smell something, or feel something, do something. That's key. And get yourself some good air purifiers. They're a necessary appliance in every home, and it's not just for spores and things like that. It's actually for the little bits of particles that come off the buildings, the paints and the finishes and stuff like that. You want to get that stuff out of your dust, out of your air. And then run those 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for the rest of your life. And then open your windows and let nature back in.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Great.
And then lastly, I'll leave you with this. We created a welcome page for all of your lovely listeners. And it's at gotmold.com/biohackerbabes. And if you go there, you'll find that there's a coupon code, BiohackerBabes10, for anyone who wants to look into testing. There's a discount there, and that's open-ended. There's no expiration date on that. And you'll also find a link to our ebook that I mentioned earlier, which is 46 pages of inspection checklists and FAQs, and it's a resource we get a lot of really positive feedback about. And so I encourage people to, if they're early in their mold journey, that's a great starting point. If you follow that ebook around your house with a flashlight, and you'll learn more about your house than you can imagine. And so I encourage people to become more familiar with your home and take the time to get to know it and make the necessary investments, because it is a inextricable part of your health. And so that's really what it's all about, is just expanding your awareness to include this ever important relationship.
Yeah.
So
Well,
important.
thank you.
It's so powerful. Yeah.
Thank you.
I am a lot smarter than I was prior to 3 o'clock today. So thank you for that.
Well,
same.
I thank you so much for having me. This is long overdue. And I'm glad to come on anytime you want. And we can probably do a shorter one next time, since we covered a lot of ground today.
We did. There's
We
more
had
though.
to. We really
There's
had
more.
to.
All right.
Yeah.
Part 2 next year.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so
All right.
much, Jason.
Thank you,
and
ladies.
thanks to everyone that tuned in today. We'll see you next time.